The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return, sponsored by Narconon Ojai.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and I'll be your host for today. And today's episode is episode number 141. And today is the day after Christmas, and I would like to take this opportunity to wish everybody that listens a fabulous, happy, and sober new year in 2020. Now, today we have an interview. Her name is Kathleen Pooler. Kathleen left her husband, Ed, due to his heavy drinking when her children, Leanne and Brian, were 3 years old and 18 months. Thinking that she was protecting her children from the ravages of alcohol abuse. However, when addiction claimed her youngest child, Brian, she realized that the cycle of alcohol abuse was being repeated within her family. Kathleen hopes her story will inspire others to never give up hope when faced with an addicted child, something we can all agree on. No matter how far down into the abyss you may go, there's always a chance for recovery. And this is what we talk about over and over again on the podcast. She wrote a book called Just the Way He Walked, a mother's story of hope and healing. And she hopes that this might offer readers insight into the impact of addiction on families and how they can learn from her story. So without further ado, let's talk to Kathleen. So Kathleen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. You know, one thing I didn't ask you is, do you prefer Kathleen or do you prefer Kathy?
I think Kathy's fine. That's what most people call me. Thank you.
Good. Then Kathy it will be.
Okay.
Your story is not unlike maybe a couple stories that we've told on the podcast, but you bring a mother's perspective to this whole area of addiction. And tell me, how did it start for you? I know that your son had a difficulty, but I think you also were married to a man that had a difficulty as well.
Yes, the father of my children, who is Ed in my first book, was an alcoholic. And I was very naive when I married him, and I figured, he was a lot of fun. He was the life of the party. And it wasn't until, it didn't take too much time to figure out that he had a major drinking problem.
Right.
And that indeed he was an alcoholic. I finally discovered. I was willing to hang in there with him as long as he was willing to get help, but of course he couldn't. He just couldn't. He actually was a good person with a very bad problem. And so after 6 years and 2 children, I walked out on him. And Brian was 18 months and Leanne was 18 months, and Leanne was 3.5.
Okay.
So they were just babies, but it was a desperate situation. And I thought that I was just leaving addiction behind. How silly of me, right? Because as my son hit puberty, and I was a single parent, it became evident, and Brian looked just like his dad. That's why the just like he walked is, when I looked at Brian, I looked at his dad, and it scared me to death. And so I had a very hyper-vigilant approach to things because I had lived through it with my husband. And the thought of it striking my son was just, it was just too difficult to even comprehend. It was too painful. But it did. And he was, the first time I saw him drunk, he was 14.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
do you know the circumstances? Like, how did he find the liquor? Was he with friends? Did he do it at home?
He just picked the wrong crowd to be with.
Okay.
And we had just moved from Missouri back home again. We had a lot of moves, and I had a lot of guilt carried with me. But yeah, he gravitated for some reason. I really honestly believed after a while that his sense of abandonment by his dad, he felt abandoned by his dad, I think. And I think that really seemed to drive his addiction.
I can see how that would be. We spoke to a young man just a couple weeks ago that had a similar thing, and his father was a drug addict and had actually attempted suicide. And there was so much anger in the young man I interviewed because he didn't understand why his dad would do that. Now, the young man I interviewed went on to become an addict himself, but
Mm-hmm.
you can sort of see that there could be a trigger there.
That father-son bond is so crucial. And I knew that, and I wanted to help him preserve it, but it was a very difficult situation that I couldn't fill in those pieces for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Did his dad ever get clean and sober?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. When he discovered that he was ill, and he actually died of cirrhosis.
Oh.
The year my book was published in 2014, but he never admitted he was an alcoholic. So he probably had stopped drinking for a year before that, but it was way too late.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people don't understand the long-term effects of drugs.
No, I know.
I mean, alcohol especially is so devastating to the body. It's anyway. Okay, so back to your son. Sorry.
It's okay. All right. So it just got worse and worse and worse. And I was in denial. I kept thinking, well, this is just a phase. We just moved. He's anxious about new friends. And, I made all kinds of excuses. And I didn't, despite the fact of being a master's prepared nurse, it's hard to believe. When it hits home, you aren't rational.
Yeah.
And I was so engulfed in it that I couldn't be rational. And I just had this magical thinking that he was going to get better. That he was just such an incredibly delightful child. And his young adulthood was just stolen from him by this. And I remember one night when he came in and he had been drinking, and I looked at him and I thought, where is my son? Where is that sweet, sensitive, loving little guy that always cared about other people so much? And he's like a monster now.
Right.
And luckily I was getting counseling, and the counselor said, when you are looking at him, you are not looking at him. You were looking at addiction right in the face.
That's right.
I said, and when I thought about it that way, I thought, that's even more devastating. Some monster has come and taken over my son. Now, what do I do about it? Because of course I felt responsible.
Right.
What did I do wrong? Despite the fact of having another child who's perfectly normal. So I still somehow blame myself for his addiction. And I think that's a common thing that parents do.
I think it's very common. And it's interesting that you voice it, because we've talked about it many times on the podcast. And, one of the things we've said is, okay, you feel guilty, but that doesn't matter. What you have to do is get help for your loved one. Like,
Right.
you can put the guilt aside and address it later, but you have to handle the problem that is presenting itself to you at the moment. Do you know what I mean? And I think so often that the guilt can keep people from doing something about it, which is another message we say over and over again. Forget about the guilt, just do something about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess what I didn't realize is the long-term nature of this, because I did eventually step in and make sure he got counseling and he got into rehab. But I naively thought that, well, he was fixed by going to rehab once. Well, that didn't take long to figure out that, relapse, I learned, is part of the disease. It's part of the recovery too, because they learn something from each relapse if they survive it.
Yeah, if they survive.
That's the clincher. Yeah.
So how old was he when he went to rehab the first time?
16.
Okay. And how long did that last?
The rehab only was like 3 weeks.
I mean the period of being sober.
Oh, I think he drank right away.
Oh, okay.
But, see, I never saw him in the act of drinking. I just saw evidence of it. I could tell by his behavior he'd been drinking. I didn't know who his friends were. I mean, I was new in town. I was director of nursing of a hospital, so I was in a high profile position in a small community, and it was just, there were so many layers of stress.
Yeah.
That it was hard for me to see clearly.
I can see that. Was it a 12-step program that he did, Kathy?
Yes.
Okay.
Pretty much all of his, he ended up in, I think, about 8 or 10 rehabs, inpatient rehabs.
Okay.
And at one point later on, he says, Mom, I know you probably don't understand this, but I actually learned something from each rehab that helped me. I said, okay, so.
Where is he now?
He is in Astoria, New York, Queens.
And is he clean and sober?
Yes, it's almost been 7 years.
Wow.
Which is just such a miracle. And he really took it seriously. I think that he just reached a point of deciding that he wanted to live and he wanted a life, and he knew that if he drank, that would not happen.
Yep.
Because he couldn't hold a job. He didn't, he was homeless. He was on the streets. He was institutionalized. He was jailed. All of the above. And I think he finally got sick and tired of it. And he was the only one who could do anything about it.
That's correct.
And so he did not, it wasn't a rehab that made him get sober.
No.
It was his realization that he was going to die young if he didn't do something.
Yep. And
so that's what it took. And, I held my breath. I thought, well, I hope this, I always wonder, is this it, and I can't say that I still hold my breath, but, I don't take it for granted for 1 minute, because I think addiction just is there all the time. And, it's up to the person to counteract all those forces of addiction.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story to tell, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. For more information on our sponsor, Narconon Ojai, visit their website at narcononoji.org. That's NARCONONOJAI.org. Or call 866-231-5924. That's 866-231-5924. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast and get a 10% discount. or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. Once again, 833-918-0008 or newmaninterventions.com. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
Absolutely. And I think that to a very large degree, he knows what it feels like to be in recovery and be sober. And he knows what he has to deal with to stay clean and sober, but you don't. And so there's a lot of doubt, because my guess is, and excuse me for saying this happened, because if it didn't, just clarify, but my guess is that when you see somebody go through rehab 8 times, every time there's hope that this will be the one that works, and then not only the disappointment that it didn't work, but also the not understanding why it didn't work. And I think sometimes that lack of understanding is even heavier with those around the former addict than it is for the addict themselves. Am I making sense?
That is perfectly said. Thank you. It was, understanding the disease. That is so crucial. Learning about it and understanding it as a disease, and knowing that you have nothing to do with it.
Right.
In fact, the best you could do is step out of the way. And I never, ever gave up, stopped loving him or gave up hope, ever.
Right. As you shouldn't.
I have something to keep me going.
Yeah.
But, I just knew that he was the one that had to be, to decide. And that it would only work if he, in fact, empowered himself to do that. And I think because he sees what it feels like. He's maintained a job for at least 4 years, a good paying job with benefits. He has a social life. He has his own apartment, which that did not happen until a couple of years ago. And he was so excited when he got his first apartment, because he was always in rooming houses or homeless shelters. And it was just a real milestone. And, there's too much at stake now to give that up.
Yep.
So
Can you say what he does? I'm just curious what kind of work he does.
Well, he works for a commercial plumbing company.
Okay.
And he was working in the field just as part of his training, but he's in the office.
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay. Well, I think that's very commendable where he's at now. And as you mentioned, the rite of passage that we all have when we, get to the point where we can move out of the house. He missed that because he was dealing with the alcohol. And so it's nice that he's now achieving all of those rites of passage that most of us do.
Well, he's making up for lost time. He has a lot of time, but he's making up for lost time.
Exactly. So just out of curiosity, does he have a good relationship? Does he have a significant other?
I don't ask too many questions. But I know that he was dating several people, and that he's so finicky too. It's interesting. And so I think he's in a relationship now, but I don't know if it's a long-term one. But as she sounds nice. I mean, I dared to ask a little bit. I don't like to pry too much, mostly because I just don't want to hear anything.
I know. I'm the same way. I have a son in Los Angeles, and I know he's dating somebody, but I don't pry.
Well, and I think sons are, I don't know, they're kind of evasive anyway.
Especially with moms as they get older.
You know what? I know. Yeah. So we've shared some really good moments, and
that's awesome.
Good. Yeah.
So tell our listeners about your book that's coming out.
Just the Way He Walked, a mother's story of hope and healing. I started writing vignettes just to get me through, because I always was a journaler, and that seemed to help me process and sort my feelings. And I decided I was going to share one vignette with Brian about the first time he was drunk. And he was in New York at the time. I don't know if he was sober or not, but he received the letter, and he opened the letter on the subway. And he said, Mom, he said, I could feel myself tear up. So I had to wait till I got to my apartment to read what you wrote. And so I got to my apartment and I bawled my eyes out. He says, I never ever dreamed that I had such an impact on you. And it was a very, no pun intended, sobering experience for him. And I think the realization that if my writing could touch him like that, I'm going to keep writing, and I'm going to involve him in the writing of this book. I even offered him to write alternate chapters if he wanted to, and he chose not to. But he was very, very involved in the minutest little details. So I just kept writing and writing, and I put it aside, and it took a lot of years.
I'm sure.
And it took a lot of years for him to accept having his story. It's rather an intimate story out into the world. And I said, well, Brian, in order to show the miracle of your sobriety, we have to show the ugliness of the disease.
That's
And
right.
this is my story. If you want to write your side, you have my invitation to do so.
Right.
I gave him free rein, so it wasn't really until within the last 6 months that he fully was able to endorse it.
Okay.
Because he had to process. He'd get stuck and he'd say, oh, Mom, I don't know if I could do this. I said, okay, well, let's give it some time, which is where the time factor comes in.
Right.
And I was willing to wait as long as I had to wait, because I was not going to put a story out there that he couldn't live with.
Yep.
Because first I'm a mother, then I'm a writer.
Yep. I understand.
Yeah. So it was a very, very tender, sensitive area.
And really, I don't know if he'll listen to this episode, and you can definitely share it with him when it goes up. But I mean, kudos to him.
Yeah.
Whenever I have someone on the podcast that tells their own personal story of addiction, I always say kudos, because you have to recall a time in your life that you're not really proud of. And that's not easy for a lot of people. I think there are a lot of people that, for all the people that tell their stories on the podcast, I think there's probably 10 times who don't even want to go there. So the fact that he was willing to let you tell it and kind of work with you on it in his own way, I give him kudos. You can tell kudos.
Yes. I told him, I said, this story is about how you overcame the ugliest possible situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a credit to you. And so you are not that person today.
Right.
And that was the alcohol speaking.
Right.
And by the way, he was mostly just alcohol.
Okay.
Well, not that I really know firsthand, but he told me that he did not do other drugs. The alcohol was his drug of choice. And, it's dangerous.
Alcohol is bad enough, as we know.
Is dead. Yeah, for any number of reasons.
Yeah.
So, I think when he realized it's A, my story, and B, it could help other people. And the more he addressed it and faced it, the less power it had over him.
Right.
Which is part of this memoir writing. It can be very transformational and healing.
I know you're a big proponent of that. I read some of that on the internet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced it, and because I face things, but I put it aside because it was too painful, or I'd cry my way through it and say, okay,
yep,
I'm going to revisit that. And I would put it away for 6 months at a time, because needed a break from it. I didn't want to relive all those memories, but we got there.
Yep.
And I really am excited to share this story because I had nothing when I was going through it. I mean, I didn't feel like I had any resources to tap into.
Right.
And now there's a plethora of addiction memoirs out there. But, I think every story is unique. And my story is unique because in the midst of his worst drinking, I developed cancer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, like the highest stage you can get. And I was very sick for a very long time. And he was like a detriment to my health.
Right.
My husband had to like protect me from him because I was so vulnerable to him.
Yep.
Because that mother instinct, you want to save him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. So I went through all kinds of things. And there are going to be people who criticize me because it took me so long, to people who don't understand, like I didn't understand. Yeah.
That's right. But, that's why you tell your story, so that hopefully, and that's why we do the podcast, so that somebody listening will not wait that long and will, confront the signs and take action on the signs that they see, because especially, we mothers, we know this, we can see what goes on. And, sometimes it's not easy to confront. And so the fact that it took you a little bit longer, well, fine. You're willing to admit that. And hopefully people hearing your story and people reading your book will go, yeah, I don't have to wait that long. I think there's something going on and I need to check on it.
Mm-hmm.
So when will your book be out? It'll be out shortly, right?
Yes. I mean, I'll get the book, the proof copy next Wednesday.
Okay.
And as soon as hopefully I can approve it. And when I approve it, I can get it live on Amazon.
Oh, perfect. So it'll be on Amazon. And just for the listeners again,
okay.
It's called Just the Way He Walked, A Mother's Story of Hope and Healing by Kathleen
Pooler.
Sorry, Kathleen Pooler. I know, it's right on my screen. Kathleen Pooler, Pooler.
Right.
Kathleen, if you had one kind of final parting message to our listeners, especially mothers, fathers, loved ones of people going through either drug or alcohol addiction, what would that be?
Reach out to get support, to learn as much as you can about this situation. Continue to love your child through it all and never, ever give up hope.
Awesome. I love it. Kathleen, be sure and let me know when the book is out, and I will mention it on the podcast.
Okay.
And once again, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today and watching on YouTube. It's the end of the year. It's December 26th, and we would like to wish you all the best in 2020. If you have a loved one that needs help, please get them into treatment. You can reach out to us. We'll help you. You can reach out to Narconon Ojai. They're there, ready to help you get clean and sober, or to help your loved one get clean and sober. We wish you all the best in 2020, and we'll talk to you next year.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return, sponsored by Narconon Ojai. For more information on Narconon Ojai, call 866-231-5924 or visit www.narcononojai.org. Narconon is a non-12-step rehabilitation program based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard.